Hey everyone! Tonight's story takes us somewhere a little unexpected. Not into battles or empires rising, but into the quieter, stranger details that history often forgets. We're talking about vanity, fashion, and power, about what it meant to be beautiful in the ancient world. So, tell me, did the ancient Romans really love blondes? And if they did, what does that say about the empire that conquered half the known world and still felt insecure about its own reflection? Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of slow, sleepy history. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing our little corner of the world come alive, one quiet listener at a time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe pour yourself something warm to drink. And, alayhi salam, you settle in. Let's drift back to marble streets and candlelit mirrors, to a time when beauty, conquest, and vanity were all tangled together in shades of gold. The color of desire and empire, approximately 2,000 words. You might not think much about hair color when imagining the rise and fall of empires. Yet, in the Roman world, the question of what shade of hair adorned one's head could hold social meaning, powerful, and citizenship itself. As you drift into this slow story, imagine yourself walking through a narrow Roman street. The sound of sandals scraping against stone, the faint smell of olive oil, and the hum of voices bouncing between high walls of pale plaster and crumbling red brick. The city feels alive, but in a tired, overworked way. Vendors call out their wares: garum fish sauce, cheap sandals, exotic perfumes. And among them, women pass by wearing wigs of pale gold, shimmering faintly in the Mediterranean sun. The Romans, it seems, were fascinated by blonde hair, not naturally Roman, but imported, borrowed, or bought. Ancient texts reveal a curious obsession. The poet Ovid advised women in Ars Amoratoria to enhance their beauty with golden locks from Germany, while Juvenal, ever the satirist, mocked women who wore another woman's hair to please men. To the Roman eye, fair hair carried the scent of both the exotic and the barbaric, an alluring contradiction. But why did blonde hair, of all things, capture the Roman imagination? The answer lies not in fashion alone, but in the mechanics of empire. When Rome conquered the northern tribes, the Gauls, the Germans, the Britons, it encountered a world of pale skin and bright hair. The Roman legions brought back not only slaves, gold, and grain, but also ideas of beauty shaped by the spoils of conquest. Germanic women, with their light hair and tall stature, became symbols of exotic allure, the embodiment of Rome's expanding boundaries. To own, imitate, or even wear their hair was to own a piece of that distant conquest. Hair, in this sense, became a currency of empire. In the crowded markets of Rome, slave traders sold wigs made from the hair of northern captives. Blonde wigs were the most prized, often labeled "from Gaul." Some even came with stories attached, hair taken from the spoils of a victorious campaign. It was not uncommon for Roman matrons, lounging in marble courtyards, to wear the hair of women their husbands had conquered in battle. A strange intimacy, then, tied together the conqueror and the conquered, the head of a Roman woman adorned with the literal strands of her empire. Still, beneath the shimmer of fashion, there was unease. Not everyone admired the foreign fad. Conservative writers complained that the imitation of barbarian beauty weakened Roman virtue. The moralist Seneca lamented how women disfigured their own nature with the colors of another race. The blonde wig to him symbolized moral decay, a sign that Rome had begun to worship its own conquests rather than its gods. And yet the trend persisted for centuries. Even emperors' wives participated. Empresses like Poppaea Sabina, known for her beauty and cunning, were rumored to have used saffron dyes and goat's fat to lighten their hair. Recipes for blonde hair survive in ancient cosmetic manuals, a mixture of vinegar, leeks, and ash left to dry under the sun. Wealthier women could afford imported Germanic hair, carefully sewn into nets and curls. Poorer women resorted to bleaching with urine, a method both cheap and unpleasant, but undeniably effective. The Roman obsession with blonde hair reached beyond aesthetics into the politics of identity. To be blonde was to stand out, a subtle rebellion against the common. It was both aspirational and artificial, a reflection of how the Romans themselves, conquerors imitating the conquered, civilized yet drawn to the barbarian's vigor. But if blonde hair was so admired, why was it so mocked in literature? Why did poets and philosophers treat it alayhi salam both desirable and shameful? Perhaps because it represented a tension Rome never resolved between admiration and domination, envy and contempt. The empire thrived on contradiction. It conquered the world, yet feared being changed by it. To understand this paradox, one must remember that ancient Rome was not a static culture, but a melting pot. Slaves from Africa, Syria, and Gaul filled its streets. Merchants from Egypt sold spices beside Greek philosophers debating in shaded porticos. A blonde wig on a Roman head was not simply fashion, it was a small daily act of cultural exchange, a quiet acknowledgement of the empire's diversity. Even alayhi salam, it pretended to deny it. Imagine then the scene inside a Roman ornatrix's workshop, the ancient equivalent of a hair salon. A wealthy matron sits before a polished bronze mirror. Around her, attendants bustle. One holds a wig stand, another grinds a paste of saffron and ash. The room smells faintly of vinegar and oil. On the wall hangs a painting of Venus, goddess of beauty, her own hair painted a shimmering yellow gold. "Make me look like her," the matron says, gesturing to the goddess. The ornatrix nods, silently sewing strands of foreign hair into a net. Outside, the noise of Rome continues, the clatter of carts, the cries of fishmongers, the murmur of 1,000 lives overlapping. For the matron, her transformation is not only vanity, it is identity, a performance of luxury, a declaration that she has the means to look unlike herself. The empire, after all, thrives on transformation. Even Roman men were not immune to the fashion. Some dyed their beards or wore wigs, though it was frowned upon. Emperor Commodus, infamous for his eccentricities, was said to dust his hair with gold powder so that it glimmered in sunlight during gladiatorial games. Pliny the Elder records that the best yellow dye came from the flower Croceus, saffron, and that some nobles used it in their baths to perfume both their skin and hair. But for the average Roman, blonde hair remained a curiosity seen in the markets or temples, a hint of something foreign and unreachable. Most Romans had dark hair and eyes, and for them, the fascination with blondness was like the fascination of modern travelers for distant lands, a dream of elsewhere. Still, there was danger in looking too foreign. Prostitutes were sometimes required by law to dye their hair blonde, distinguishing them from respectable citizens. The result was a paradoxical social code. The same color that symbolized luxury and conquest could also mark shame and transgression. The line between beauty and immorality was alayhi salam thin, alayhi salam a strand of hair. So much of Roman life operated on such contradictions. Wealth built on slavery, virtue built on spectacle, civilization built on conquest. And perhaps that's why the question of blonde hair lingered in their art and literature. It was never just about color, but about control. The control of nature, identity, and others. You listen. Imagine that same Roman matron lying down at night, her wig carefully removed, her real hair dark and plain beneath. In the lamplight, she stares at the foreign hair coiled neatly beside her bed, a trophy of empire, a mirror of ambition. What, she might wonder, will become of Rome when the gold fades? The alchemy of beauty and power. You wake again in Rome, only this time it's quieter. The sun has not yet reached the marble statues or the terracotta roofs. The streets smell faintly of bread from the bakeries, and the first hints of smoke rise from the household hearths. In this early hush, the city seems to breathe differently, slower, almost reflective. Somewhere behind a shaded courtyard wall, a woman is already awake, sitting before her speculum, her bronze mirror. An attendant carefully oils and curls strands of hair that aren't hers. This ritual, ordinary as it may seem, was a form of alchemy in the Roman world, the transformation of identity through color, texture, and imitation. Because beauty for the Romans was never just personal, it was political. The politics of appearance. To understand Rome's obsession with blonde hair, you must first understand what beauty meant to an empire built on hierarchy. Everything in Roman society was ranked, not just people, but even shades of skin, accents, and clothing. The ideal Roman woman was expected to embody pudicitia, modesty, restraint, and virtue. Yet, paradoxically, she was also expected to represent the wealth and power of her household. A man's reputation could rise or fall by how his wife presented herself at public banquets or festivals. Her jewelry, her perfume, her hair, each spoke of his social position. The wealthier the household, the more elaborate the coiffure. Blonde wigs, therefore, were not mere vanity, but symbols of power. They told the world that a family could afford the luxury of appearance, and that they were worldly enough to imitate foreign beauty without losing Roman dignity. This strange balancing act shaped Roman culture for centuries. To imitate others without becoming them. To borrow from the conquered without being conquered in turn. Hair, alayhi salam status. Hair, alayhi salam story. Hair played a role in nearly every stage of Roman life. When a girl came of age, her hair was bound in a special knot, the nodus, to signify modesty. On her wedding day, her hair would be parted with a justa calibaris, a ceremonial spear symbolizing her passage into womanhood and the defense of her new household. When widowed, she might unbind her hair again, a sign of mourning. The Roman imagination tied virtue, fate, and hair together in intricate ways. To cut one's hair could be an act of purification, penance, or mourning. Slaves, soldiers, and penitents were shaved. Brides and vestal virgins were carefully styled. Every lock carried meaning. So, when women began dyeing or covering their hair in foreign shades, traditionalists sallallahu alaihi wasallam it alayhi salam a dangerous blur, an erosion of boundaries. What are we if we no longer look Roman, wrote a minor poet whose name time forgot. The question hung heavy in the air because Rome itself was changing. By the 1st century CE, the empire stretched from Scotland to Syria. The capital was a patchwork of faces, languages, and fashions. In the crowded Sabura district, you could find Syrians selling perfumes, Greeks teaching rhetoric, and Nubians carving ivory combs. Beauty standards traveled with them, ideas of what was desirable and what was shameful blending into one another. The blonde wig was just one symptom of a greater anxiety, the fear of becoming too cosmopolitan. The wigs of empire. Let's pause for a moment to imagine one of the most common sights in Roman domestic life: the capsarium and ornatrix, the hairdressers of wealthy households. These women, usually enslaved, performed hours of work every day on their mistresses' heads. Pliny the Younger once complained in a letter about his wife's endless mornings spent under siege by a small army of attendants. Ancient mirrors show us images of women with complex arrangements: braids stacked high, curls pinned in layers, loops wrapped in nets. To achieve this, the ordinatresses needed wigs, pins, combs, and an almost mathematical sense of geometry. The finest wigs came from the north, especially from captured Germanic women. Blonde hair was imported in bulk, traded like fabric or spice. Merchants in Gaul and along the Rhine built fortunes selling hair to Rome's beauty markets. The strands were washed in ash water, soaked in oils, and curled on small bronze rods. The finished wigs were stored on carved stands or waxed heads when not in use. Every strand told a story, one of conquest, trade, and transformation. The hair of a girl from a far-off village on the Danube might, within weeks, crown the head of a senator's wife at a festival on the Palatine Hill. Some Roman writers found this unsettling. The philosopher Pliny the Elder noted with irony that the spoils of the enemy are worn upon our women's heads. To him, the blonde wig was a literal inversion of victory, the conquered adorning the conqueror. It made visible the uncomfortable truth that Rome depended on the very people it subjugated. And yet, this paradox was not limited to women. Men, too, engaged in grooming rituals. Barber shops, tonstrini, were social centers, places where gossip flowed, alayhi salam, freely, alayhi salam wine. Some men powdered their hair with gold dust, while others experimented with pomades or perfumes imported from Arabia. Emperor Nero reportedly had his hair singed lightly with a heated comb to maintain its waviness, while Commodus, ever the performer, gilded his locks before appearing in public spectacles. Rome, beneath its stoic marble mask, was a society obsessed with surface. The science of imitation. The Romans were not content to merely borrow beauty, they sought to master it. Ancient recipes for dyes and hair treatments reveal a startling mix of ingenuity and superstition. One surviving text from the Medicina Antiqua describes a method for achieving a shining yellow hue. Take the ashes of vine twigs, mix with goat's fat, and leave upon the hair for a day beneath the sun. Another recipe adds saffron and vinegar. Wealthier women used imported dyes made from luteum, a plant also used in textiles.
Poorer women resorted to a harsher but effective bleach made from urine collected from public baths. The ammonia in it worked surprisingly well.
Even the act of sitting in the sun became part of beauty culture. Women perched on rooftops or balconies, wearing broad-brimmed hats with holes cut for hair, letting the sunlight bake the dye into a lighter shade. This was beauty alayhi salam labor, hours of patience and discomfort to mimic a color never meant to be theirs. Yet, in the quiet monotony of it, there was also ritual. The slow transformation of self was not unlike the careful polishing of a statue or the layering of fresco paint. Rome's women, through this daily alchemy, became artists of their own image. Beauty, morality, and fear. But imitation always invited suspicion. The moralists of Rome were relentless in their criticism. Juvenal's satires mocked women who carry another woman's scalp upon their brow. Seneca accused them of falsehood and decay. Even Cicero, centuries earlier, wrote derisively of those who alter nature's gift for the vanity of men. Yet these same critics dined with women who did exactly that. They railed against the decline of morals while attending feasts where the air was thick with perfume and laughter. Rome's elite lived in contradiction, praising virtue while indulging in luxury. In truth, the anxiety around blonde hair had little to do with color itself. It was about change, about who controlled it. When men changed the empire through war and conquest, it was celebrated. When women changed their appearance, it was feared. The body of a Roman woman became a microcosm of the empire's boundaries, a canvas on which Rome painted its power and its insecurities. The same society that enslaved northern women to harvest their hair also mocked Roman women for wearing it. The hypocrisy was baked into the marble. From vanity to identity. Alayhi salam, centuries passed, these fashions evolved but never vanished. By the 2nd century, hairstyles grew taller and more intricate. Sculptures of Empress Julia Domna, with her thick, dark curls, replaced the golden tones once favored by Poppaea or Messalina. The pendulum of taste swung again, from blonde to brunette, from foreign to familiar. Historians now see this a reflection of political shifts. The empire's heart was no longer merely Roman. It was Mediterranean, African, and Asian. Julia Domna herself came from Syria, and her natural dark hair became fashionable across the empire. Rome's ideal of beauty had changed once again, proof that identity, even in the most powerful empire on earth, was never fixed. But deep beneath the marble, some things lingered. The fascination with transformation, the tension between nature and artifice, the quiet belief that beauty could be both power and disguise. These ideas survived the fall of Rome. Centuries later, when Renaissance painters depicted Venus with golden hair, they were unknowingly echoing Roman ideals. Even the modern Western fixation on blonde beauty traces its lineage, in part, to the empire's strange entanglement of conquest and desire. What began alayhi salam war trophies woven into wigs became an enduring cultural symbol of purity, temptation, and dominance. The blonde that conquered Rome. Imagine again that matron in her candle-lit room. The wig is in place now, gleaming faintly in the flicker of oil lamps. She rises, adjusts her jewelry, and prepares to attend a dinner at her husband's villa. To her, this hair is not stolen, it is earned, a rightful adornment of empire. Her husband, seated among senators, may boast of conquests in Gaul or trade with Hispania. Yet her appearance tells a subtler story, the domestic echo of imperialism. The empire does not just conquer lands, it absorbs them, wears them, becomes them. Somewhere across the Alps, a woman whose hair was taken for that wig might be feeding her children in a wooden hut, unaware that a piece of her lives on in Rome's glittering heart. The empire is vast, but its connections are intimate. Every strand of hair, every drop of perfume, every silk thread crossing the Mediterranean, all carry traces of human exchange, of loss, of aspiration. And so the question, did the ancient Romans love blondes, becomes less about aesthetics and more about what they loved in themselves, their reflection in others, their desire to see their empire mirrored in beauty. The blonde wig, shining faintly in the torchlight, was both victory and confession, the empire's own mirror of insecurity. Because for all their marble and might, the Romans never stopped trying to be something they were not. And perhaps that's what made them so human. From empire to icon, the afterlife of a color. The Roman Empire eventually collapsed, not in one night, Alayhi Salam later storytellers imagined, but slowly, unevenly, like a candle guttering in drafts of its own making. And yet, even Alayhi Salam marble crumbled and legions disappeared. The small vanities of the empire lingered. A shade of hair, a trick of the light, a lingering idea of what it meant to be beautiful. The empire is vast, but its connections are intimate. Every strand of hair, every drop of perfume, every silk thread crossing the Mediterranean, all carry traces of human exchange, of loss, of aspiration. And so the question, did the ancient Romans love blondes, becomes less about aesthetics and more about what they loved in themselves, their reflection in others, their desire to see their empire mirrored in beauty. The blonde wig, shining faintly in the torchlight, was both victory and confession, the empire's own mirror of insecurity. Because for all their marble and might, the Romans never stopped trying to be something they were not. And perhaps that's what made them so human. From empire to icon, the afterlife of a color.
Tonight, Alayhi Salam, we drift further into this story. We move beyond the streets of Rome. The wigs are stored away, the markets emptied, and the empire is fading into 1,000 smaller worlds. But that golden image, the blonde Alayhi Salam beauty, purity, conquest, refuses to die. It will follow Europe for another 2,000 years. From the temples to the churches. When Christianity began to spread across the empire, it brought with it a new sense of morality. The pagan gods, Venus, Apollo, Minerva, were slowly replaced by saints and martyrs. Yet early Christian writers could not easily escape the old Roman ideals. In mosaics of the Virgin Mary, we see traces of the Roman matron, veiled, dignified, modest. In depictions of angels and saints, particularly in Byzantine art, golden hair reappears, a symbol of divinity, not vanity. The color once linked to Germanic captives now shimmered around the heads of holy figures, transformed into halos. This was Rome's great trick. It never truly died. It merely retranslated itself. The Church condemned vanity, but borrowed its language of beauty. The blonde hair that once adorned the mistresses of emperors now framed the faces of saints. The transformation was moral rather than aesthetic. Gold was still gold, only now it belonged to heaven. But beneath this sanctified glow, an old tension persisted. The early theologians, men like Tertullian and Jerome, warned women against altering their appearance. Jerome wrote sharply, "Those who dye their hair wish to correct the work of God." To him, false beauty was a form of pride, a sin of rebellion. And yet, church frescoes gleamed with golden pigments. The faithful prayed beneath ceilings painted with celestial blondes. Beauty, it seemed, was too deeply woven into human longing to banish. The barbarian queens. After Rome's fall, Europe entered what historians once called the Dark Ages, though darkness is rarely absolute. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Rome brought their own ideals of beauty. Among the Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards, light hair was natural rather than exotic, yet it still carried the echo of Roman prestige. To be blonde in early medieval Europe was to appear noble, touched by sunlight, nearer to the divine. Chroniclers described queens with hair like threads of gold, not because it was rare, but because it evoked radiance, virtue, and favor. But the Roman ghost still lingered.
In the monasteries, where Latin texts were copied by hand, scribes preserved Ovid and Juvenal, the poets who mocked and adored blonde beauty centuries earlier. Their verses slipped quietly into the imagination of a new Europe, where monks illuminated manuscripts with gilt paint, and storytellers spoke of maidens with golden hair who bewitched knights and saints alike. The empire had passed away, but its reflection in the mirror of beauty remained. Alchemy in the cloister. By the 12th century, Europe had learned new arts from the East. Through trade and crusade, knowledge flowed once again. Glass-making, perfume distillation, cosmetics. The art of hair dye returned, now recorded in apothecary manuals and nuns' recipe books. One anonymous 14th century text gives a recipe to make the hair fair and bright, alayhi salam flax. Take ashes of vine and barley, mix with honey and white wine, and anoint the head, sitting long in the sun. The echo of Roman methods is unmistakable. The tools had changed little, ash, vinegar, sunlight, but the purpose had evolved. In medieval Europe, blonde hair was no longer the mark of conquest. It was the mark of piety, chastity, or sometimes temptation. Because even holiness, it seemed, was never free from desire. In stained glass windows, the virgin's hair shines gold. In courtly romances, so does that of the temptress. One symbolizes the unattainable, the other the forbidden. Both inherit their glow from the same Roman ideal. From empire to court. By the Renaissance, artists rediscovered Rome in earnest. Scholars studied ancient texts, painters sought to imitate classical forms. And with this revival came the return of ancient beauty standards, including the cult of the blonde. In Florence and Venice, women bleached their hair with saffron and sunlight, reclining on rooftops under wide-brimmed hats called solanas. The process could take hours. Travelers described Venetian women with pale golden hair falling in long braids, glimmering like silk. Botticelli's Birth of Venus
1486 captured the ideal perfectly. A goddess with hair like spun gold, flowing endlessly over the sea. The image was revolutionary and nostalgic all at once. A Roman dream reborn through Christian eyes. Writers of the time praised angelic blondes. Petrarch's sonnets to Laura likened her hair to sunlight itself.
The golden-haired woman became both muse and mirror, a reflection of the artist's longing, the human desire to capture divine perfection through earthly beauty. Rome's obsession had simply changed costume. The wigs of empire had become the halos of art. The Northern Light. In Northern Europe, where light hair was more common, the symbolism inverted again. There, darker hair often represented mystery or exoticism, while blondness suggested innocence and sincerity. Medieval and Renaissance literature are filled with this contrast. The fair maiden versus the dark temptress, the pure angel against the worldly siren. It is the same old Roman dichotomy of virtue and vice, reborn in poetry and song. Even Shakespeare, centuries later, would echo it. Desdemona's pale skin and fair looks mark her purity, while darker women are often written alias cunning or sensual. These patterns stretch back almost invisibly to Roman marble busts and whispered gossip in the atriums of emperors. Rome had exported more than laws and roads. It had exported the grammar of beauty. Hair and the hierarchy of power. It is tempting to dismiss these obsessions as trivial, but hair color in every age revealed something about who held power and who desired it. In the Roman world, blonde hair symbolized conquest, the spoils of northern tribes. In the Christian Middle Ages, it became sanctified, the color of angels and purity. In the Renaissance, it turned aspirational, the mark of artistic and divine inspiration. Each transformation mirrored a new order trying to define itself against the old. When blonde hair adorned Roman matrons, it was a claim to imperial luxury. When it framed saints, it became a claim to holiness. When it flowed from Venus's shell, it became a claim to beauty itself. And always, behind the surface, there was labor. The bleaching, the burning, the imitation. Centuries of women shaping and reshaping themselves to fit the ideals of men, priests, poets, or emperors. The legacy of a color. Even in modern times, echoes of this ancient fixation remain. The phrase blonde beauty still carries connotations shaped long ago, ideas of purity, innocence, privilege, or allure. The Romans didn't invent those meanings, but they gave them structure, hierarchy, and myth. Advertising in the 20th century, film in the 1950s, even fashion photography, all in their own way trace the same line that began in a Roman marketplace.
The empire's blonde wigs have become Hollywood's golden curls. But perhaps the Romans would recognize something familiar in this continuity, a culture still chasing perfection through imitation, still defining power through appearance. The marble has changed, the mirror remains. The human element. Alayhi Salam, you imagine all of this. Picture once more that Roman matron in her quiet room, centuries earlier. Her blonde wig gleams in the lamplight, but her eyes are tired. Outside, the city murmurs, restless and eternal. She doesn't know that her small act of imitation will echo across millennia, that artists, saints, and poets will chase the same color she wears tonight.
She only knows that, for a few hours, she can look like the stories whispered by men who never knew her. In that single moment, history becomes very small. The vast empire collapses into a private gesture, a hand smoothing borrowed hair, a sigh in the dark. Maybe that is what Rome left us, not only monuments and ruins, but the quiet persistence of human longing, the need to become more than what we are, to paint ourselves in gold before the light fades. Reflection. So, did the ancient Romans truly love blondes? Perhaps, but what they really loved was the idea of transformation, of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, the conquered into the admired, the foreign into the familiar. And through that love, they taught the world to confuse beauty with worth, imitation with aspiration. 2,000 years later, we still live in that shadow, brushing the same dust of empire from our mirrors. The Roman matron removes her wig before sleeping. The curls rest on a bronze stand, silent and gleaming in the faint glow of the oil lamp. Outside, the streets of Rome hum softly, a lullaby of distant footsteps and murmured prayers. The city dreams of eternity, and beauty, ever restless, dreams of gold. The fade of gold, when vanity met mortality. The golden curls have dulled now. The city that once glimmered beneath the Mediterranean sun has grown quieter, its marble blackened by centuries of smoke. The empire is aging. But in its twilight, Rome reveals something truer than its triumphs, something far more human. For every statue and inscription that survives, there are 1,000 small vanities and private gestures lost to time. The women who bleached their hair, the men who powdered their beards, the slaves who brushed out tangles in silence. The city dreams of eternity, and beauty, ever restless, dreams of gold. The fade of gold, when vanity met mortality. The golden curls have dulled now. The city that once glimmered beneath the Mediterranean sun has grown quieter, its marble blackened by centuries of smoke. The empire is aging. But in its twilight, Rome reveals something truer than its triumphs, something far more human. For every statue and inscription that survives, there are 1,000 small vanities and private gestures lost to time. The women who bleached their hair, the men who powdered their beards, the slaves who brushed out tangles in silence.
History rarely records these moments, yet they built the rhythm of life more surely than the speeches of emperors. The question of whether the Romans loved blondes becomes, in the end, a question about what they loved in themselves. The fragile illusion of control in a world already slipping toward decay. The empire's mirror cracks. By the 3rd century CE, the glamour had begun to fade. The empire was fracturing, invaded from without, corrupted from within. Economic instability, plague, and civil war had eroded the foundations of grandeur. And alayhi salam, Rome lost its certainty. Its beauty rituals became increasingly desperate, almost superstitious. The great markets of luxury goods, wigs, perfumes, and dyed fabrics still existed, but they served a dwindling elite. The majority of the population struggled with shortages, taxes, and hunger. The city's water systems fell into disrepair. Marble facades crumbled. Yet, even amidst collapse, vanity endured. Archaeologists have found cosmetic boxes and combs buried in the ruins of Pompeii and Ostia, proof that the small rituals of beauty persisted even in chaos. A Roman woman might flee a burning villa, but still clutch her mirror, her little bottle of oil, her bronze hairpin.
There's something moving in that, a quiet insistence on self, on dignity. Even alayhi salam, the world burned around her. But beneath the surface, another transformation was taking place. The rise of humility. Alayhi salam Christianity grew stronger. The old ideals of beauty began to feel hollow. The faith's early leaders taught that adornment was vanity, that the body was fleeting, and that the soul's purity mattered more than golden curls or painted faces. In the 4th century, when Emperor Constantine converted, he brought this new moral tone into imperial life. Portraits of women from the Christianized empire show a shift. Hairstyles simplified, jewelry reduced, expressions subdued. The golden shimmer of wigs gave way to veils and modest buns. A Roman matron of this new world no longer sought to imitate Venus, but the Virgin. Beauty was no longer about conquest, but about humility. The transformation was profound. The empire that once worshipped form now turned its gaze inward, toward the invisible. And yet, the fascination with gold never entirely vanished. In the mosaics of Ravenna, in the halos of saints, the shimmer of divine light still mimics the old blonde radiance.
The color of hair had become the color of holiness. Rome had reinterpreted its vanity, Allah's salam. It was Allah's though the empire, ashamed of its old reflection, had polished the same mirror until it gleamed with piety. The bones beneath the gold. If you were to walk through a Roman catacomb, torchlight flickering on the walls, you would see frescoes of men and women painted in ochre and gold. Their faces are serene, their eyes lifted. But the deeper you go, the colder it gets. The beauty of the living world fades into silence. Here, hair color no longer matters. The skulls that fill the shelves could have been dark-haired or fair. In death, they are all the same pale dust. And yet, even among the tombs, Rome refused to let go of elegance. Some bodies were buried with jewelry still clasped to bone, others with hair carefully braided or veiled. Death, too, became a performance, a final attempt to appear composed before eternity. In this strange persistence, we glimpse the Romans' greatest paradox. They built monuments to eternity while chasing a beauty that lasted only a season. Their love of blondness, so trivial, so specific, was a symptom of a much larger longing, the human desire to freeze time, to turn the fleeting into the immortal. The survival of the superficial. When we imagine history, we picture armies and emperors. But civilization often survives through its small habits, the recipes, the fashions, the idle obsessions. After the fall of Rome, monks in distant monasteries still copied texts describing ancient cosmetics. Merchants in Constantinople sold dyes and ointments bearing Latin names. Even Allah's Europe reshaped itself. The Roman idea of beauty seeped through its cracks, soft but unstoppable. The blonde wig itself, once a symbol of imperial arrogance, reappeared centuries later in the courts of France and England. The powdered curls of Louis XIV, the golden ringlets of Queen Elizabeth I, all faint echoes of Rome's salons and atriums.
The empire had died, but its vanity survived. Every new age found a way to reframe the same desire. Gold became powder, curls became wigs, and wigs became hair dye. The ritual remained the same, an act of transformation, a rebellion against nature, a declaration of self-worth through artifice. Perhaps that is why the question still fascinates us today. The psychology of gold. Why did the Romans love blondes? Maybe because gold was the color of sunlight, of warmth, vitality, the promise of something eternal. In their religion, the gods lived among clouds of light. To emulate that glow was to borrow a fragment of divinity. It's a human impulse to imitate the things we worship. The Roman matron bleaching her hair in the sun wasn't only chasing fashion, she was chasing immortality in her own quiet way. She was saying, I too can hold the light, even if just for a little while. And isn't that, in the end, what civilization is? A series of fleeting lights held up against the darkness. A city of reflections. Al-Salam the empire waned. Travelers began to write of Rome, Al-Salam, a place of ghosts. The poet Rutilius Nematianus, returning to the city in the 5th century, described it, Al-Salam, the mother of nations, fallen but not forgotten. Her temples were empty, her forums silent, but the memory of her power lingered like perfume in abandoned halls. He did not mention the women or their wigs. History rarely does. But in the silence of those ruins, one can almost hear the faint rustle of silk, the quiet chatter of mirrors and combs, the sigh of a city that once believed beauty could outlast mortality. Even now, when tourists walk through the Forum under the Roman sun, the light glints off the marble in soft gold, the same color once admired, envied, and feared. It is Al-Salam, though the city itself remembers. Lessons from vanity. Perhaps in their obsession with appearances, the Romans understood something we prefer to forget. That civilization is Al-Salam, fragile, Al-Salam, beauty. Both require maintenance, attention, and belief. When neglected, both decay. Their mirrors, polished bronze, reflected not only faces, but ideals. To see oneself Al-Salam beautiful was to believe the empire still held order, that the world still made sense. When the mirrors cracked, when the wigs lost their shine, when the dye no longer took, perhaps that was when Rome began to sense its own mortality. The surface had always been its secret armor. And so, through the quiet vanity of 1,000 citizens, we glimpse the story of an empire trying to keep its reflection intact even as the walls trembled. Epilogue: The Fade of Gold. Tonight, Al-Salam, we end this story. Imagine standing once more in that Roman bedroom centuries ago. The air smells faintly of olive oil and smoke. The lamps burn low. On a small table sits a wig of golden hair, perfectly arranged, waiting for morning. Its owner has long since vanished. The house is dust, the empire gone. But the hair remains, brittle, preserved by time, its color still faintly golden. Archaeologists may one day find it and marvel at its delicacy, its strange endurance. To them, it will be an artifact. To us, it is a whisper, a reminder that even the smallest human vanities can outlive empires. Because history, for all its grandeur, is nothing more than the accumulation of small gestures repeated endlessly. A hand in the mirror, a brush through hair, a longing for light. And perhaps in those quiet repetitions, the Romans found something close to immortality after all. So, did the ancient Romans love blondes? Yes, but what they truly loved was the illusion that gold could defy time. And maybe, even now, alayhi salam, we chase our own reflections across the centuries. We love that illusion too. The lamps fade. The streets are silent. The gold turns to dust. And somewhere, in the hush of history, Rome still dreams of light.